Hello, and welcome to Behind the Screen, a Game Master's Guide. This is a show where I take you behind my Game Master screen, and I share some of my favorite tips, some of my tricks, some tools, and some toys that I'm using to become a better Game Master. My name is Tom Tobar, and today's topic is Campaign Notekeeping, Tome of the Game Master. In a world filled with bandits, sellswords, and dragons, a wizard must rely on their knowledge of the arcane to match the strength of those that would do them harm. Not having the correct spell prepared is the difference between shaping the battlefield to your desires or becoming one of the nameless victims that it consumes. For this reason, there is nothing more important to a wizard than their spellbook. Each page of their magical tome is filled with not only secrets of the arcane, but also their hopes, their desires, their unspoken dreams. Each page of these tomes a mighty weapon, and each page a mirror into their truest self. Where this is all true of a wizard, I would say that it's equally as true of a game master and their notes. With well-prepared notes, a game master can shape their world to their desires and create an experience their players will be dying to explore. However, where a wizard is all but useless without their spells, I would argue the same is true with a game master without their notes. Well, sure, with an experienced game master, I'm sure they're able to make a single or maybe a few adventures without any kind of preparation. Much like a wizard who relies on skill checks or role-playing to succeed instead of their spells. But I would say that it's very difficult to do this and still have a cohesive story all the way through. The longer the campaign is, the easier it is to fall apart at the seams if you don't have good notes. Well, you may be asking yourself, can my players really tell if I don't have any good notes? And the answer is yes. Yes, they absolutely can. Here are a few warning signs that indicate to your players that you really didn't have any notes and you didn't really prepare for your session. Long pauses in the game. Nothing breaks a game's momentum more than long pauses. A lot of long pauses are unnecessary if you have good notes. Now, your players will be patient with you if you need to flip through a few pages in the rulebook or remember the name of that pirate that they dealt with 3 sessions back. Those things are okay. As well as getting a battle map out or starting to draw on a grid. These things are fine. But here's how to know if you're taking way too long. Everybody just stops talking. Or they start talking about things that have nothing to do with the session. That's when you know that, I think I'm taking a little too long getting myself prepared. I've been involved in games where the game master took so long to prepare themselves that by the time that they were ready, everybody at the table didn't even know what we were doing anymore. The better your notes are, the shorter your pauses will be, and the more engaged your players will be. Game Master Amnesia. Your players are invested in the story that you are telling. They remember every little detail. Okay, maybe not every detail. For the most part, they do, though. Many of them even may take their own notes. If you can't remember major portions of your own story, that doesn't send very good signals to your players. They may feel like the story doesn't mean anything to you. It might even tell them that they shouldn't pay attention as well. Or at worst, it might tell them that you really just don't value their time. If you want to kill the desire to play at your table, this is definitely the way to do it. Now, as a game master, the longer the campaign is, the harder it is to keep every single little detail in your head. In these cases, your players will be patient with you if you can't remember everything. However, you should take these momentary lapses of amnesia to write a better note so that you don't run into the same problem again later on. The better the notes that you take, the more your players will feel like their character choices make a real difference in the world that you're creating. And they'll feel more engaged as players as well. No direction or goals. There is an old saying, if you aim at nothing, you will hit it every single time. This is very true of storytelling in general. During a game, it can make your players feel really uncomfortable. You know that feeling that you get when you're forced to have a conversation with someone that you really just don't know, or you don't have a lot in common with? Like at a party or something. You end up talking forever about absolutely nothing. Even during the conversation, you're trying to find ways of trying to get out of it. This is the kind of same feeling you get for your players if you're interacting in a world that doesn't go anywhere. Even if you throw a battle at them to distract them from your lack of preparation, in the end, who really cares if you win? They still find themselves in a world with nothing to do. The better your notes, the more goals you can set in front of your players. No direction, really, at the end of the day, means no adventure. Bad versus good versus epic adventures. Imagine for a moment the story of The Lord of the Rings. Frodo finds out that he is in possession of the Ring of Power. He has an absolutely great adventure getting this ring all the way from his homeland all the way to the elven city of Rivendell. There's a council of people all standing around, deciding the fate of this one ring and how to destroy it. Gimli the dwarf stands up proudly with his axe and says, "What are we waiting for?" And he goes over to the ring, swings his axe, and he destroys the ring forever. Everybody cheers, and the story ends. Even in that example, still would be considered a fantastic story. However, how much more of the story did we end up missing? About 2 books worth. What about your campaign? Sure, the players feel really good about what they just did. They slayed the monster, they freed the lost children, they got to the center of the maze, they destroyed the Ring of Power. But in the end, there was really only one path, one solution: success or failure. There's nothing wrong with this for a one-shot, but everybody at the table misses out on a truly epic story when the ring can't be destroyed by Gimli's axe. But making a story with that much depth requires careful planning. And where do you put all this careful planning? You use your Game Master notes. So, with better notes comes a more dynamic story filled with adventure. No notes means you have to make simpler objectives, and then you have a lack of depth in your story. So in review, yes, your players can tell if you don't have good notes. They can tell because you have really long, awkward pauses in the middle of your game. Or you end up with Game Master amnesia, where you forget major portions of your own story. The story itself seems to have no real direction and no real movement, or the movement that you do have is kind of one-dimensional. There's not a lot of great epic pieces in their story because you couldn't plan for them. How about you? Are there ways that you can tell that your Game Master didn't have good notes? How did it affect your game? Write about these experiences that you've had in the comments below. Oh, and while you're down there, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Alright, we've covered some of the reasons why you should keep good notes, and now comes the part I'm sure you've all been waiting for: how to keep your notes. Before we begin, however, I'm going to have to share some disclaimers. First, for the rest of this video, I'm going to assume you're working on a larger campaign. The reason is it's much easier to scale back from a larger campaign than it is to start from a smaller one and build up from there. For this reason, it's going to feel like overkill for some game masters in every campaign. Make adjustments as you need and see fit. Also, where you keep your notes is just as important as how you organize them. If you're running a small campaign, then keeping your notes on pen and paper work just fine. If you're running a larger campaign, however, I would highly suggest that you use a digital note-keeping system. There are many people who can keep these types of handwritten notes for larger campaigns, but unless you know exactly what it is that you're doing, you might be better off just keeping a digital note-keeping system instead. For this video, I'm going to assume you're using a digital note-keeping system, and you'll see why when I start revealing what I do. I'm also going to be sharing what works for me. This is by no means the only way to keep campaign notes, but it is a great place to start if you're just starting out. Again, you should focus in on the tips that make the most sense for you. Remember, not every wizard's spellbook is the same, and neither should every game master's notes either. Notes organization. The goal of creating and keeping Game Master notes is to keep your campaign organized and moving forward as smoothly and as quickly as possible. For this reason, it's important to remember that writing notes is not like writing a book or like writing an essay for school. Instead, it's like a resource that you would use, like a map or a dictionary. You would never read a dictionary from start to finish, and for the same reasons, you should never write your notes in a linear fashion. Instead, it's extremely important to organize your information in the following kind of a format. I do it by having large units of information, followed by topics of information, followed by subtopics of information if I need it. Remember, your goal is to be able to get to your information quickly. That means you have to be able to jump through large amounts of notes and then find the exact information that you need without having to skim and skim to find what you're looking for. Let me share with you the large units of information that work well for me. All of my Game Master notes fall into one of these 5 units. Now let's go ahead and take each unit individually so you can understand how I fill each one up with topics and subtopics. Let's get started with Game Master tools. As you can see, this unit is filled with information about the mechanics of the game. If you like to use physical books to quickly look things up during the game, then you might not need all of this section. For me, I like to have it in a digital format because it's easy for me to kind of quickly look through and search for what I'm looking for. Things like common effects, things related to the player's handbook, and even things related to the Game Master's handbook as well. Under these topics, I have one named Other Tools. This topic is one of my all-time favorites. It has all of my generators, from loot generators, from shop generators, items with prices, generators for names and locations, quick encounters, musical notes, homebrew rules, things like how to craft magical items for my players. I use this all the time in my game. For example, your players will want to go and shop at the oddest of times. The last thing you want to do is spend hours looking things up on the internet to fill the room with items for them to buy. Instead, I rely on some of these links to fill in the room with those items, and I can focus more on storytelling elements. For example, interesting shop owners, or that cursed item that looks irresistible to my players. I'm always on the lookout for great generators, so if you find one that you like, make sure to put it into the comments below to help us all run a better game. Unit number 2, Character Information. I personally have this list of topics and subtopics for each one of my players. Having a way to easily access a player's character sheet and backstory in-game is helpful for a number of reasons. Personally, I also like to keep a list of important names from their backstories. What was the name of that sister that they had, that they lost? Or what was the name of that cult that killed their dog? Having this list handy is much better than skimming through large amounts of information for the same thing. Also, I personally love writing Game Master backstories for each one of my players. It's something that I do so that they feel like they're part of the story even before Game 1 starts. What it is, it's their backstory and then the beginning of the campaign and that link in between them. And then, when they come into the first session, they're already ready to go and in character. Overarching campaign notes. This is a great spot for me to explain that there are 3 types of notes that are kept in a Game Master's notebook. First, there's resources. Next, there's pre-game prep. And finally, there's in-game notes. There are a lot of notes that you'll need to have ready to go before any dice start hitting your table. Other times, you'll be forced to make something up on the spot and then need a place to store all this new information. The topic World History Timeline is filled with both pre-game notes and in-game notes. There are major events that I know I want to have happen in the world of my story. So before the game starts, I fill in quick dates along with some short explanations of the event. So for example, I know that I want the Lich King to have reigned over this land for 60 years, years filled with terror, and none felt safe. Short, simple, to the point. During the game, however, the player asks the questions. Well, when did the Lich King get killed? And so I have to make something up quickly. Well, the evil Lich King was killed about 20 years ago. Because I'm dealing with history made up on the spot, I have to quickly add this to the page. And if I don't do this, I can run into some problems a little later on. For example, Session 3, my players are talking to the innkeeper, and they're asking him, well, hey, how long have you owned the inn here in town? Well, he's owned this inn here happily for the past 30 years, he answers. He loves it so much, he could never even think about leaving. Oh, says your player, so he lived here happily during the Lich King's reign of terror? I guess he really wasn't that bad of a guy. And suddenly you realize, oh no, my player's right. The innkeeper would have been there during the reign of terror, and he was happy to do so? Okay, now the stuff's not lining up, and now you've got a whole issue you got to deal with. This is called writing yourself into a corner or creating a paradox. And if you don't write things down and have a good place to track that information, then these paradoxes can become very big issues later on. So, how do you stop this from happening in your game? You make a timeline, and so that way when something happens in history, you can write it down quickly, and then when you're making new history up on the spot, you can quickly go to that page, look it over, and say, oh, hold on, this innkeeper's only had this inn for 20 years, right after the Lich King. Okay, so on my second topic for this unit, character timeline. This topic is simply an overview of the major arcs of my campaign. Again, simple bullets are all that's needed here. Player's level, the town that they were visiting, this A, B, and C happened while they were there. I found this extremely helpful because my campaigns go for long periods of time, and it's hard to remember what actually happened a physical year ago in the real world. And so if I go to this page, I can quickly remember, oh, that's where they were, that's what they did, and that's why what's going to happen next in the story is so important. The topic major plot points, on the other hand, helps me see the progress the players are making over the course of the entire campaign. For example, in this arc of the campaign, in the Dwarven City, they didn't really find the big bad evil guy. That means that the big bad evil guy is free to go and do more things later on to the characters in later arcs. And then I can make little notes to myself as to what's going to happen in future arcs of my campaign. Unit 4, World Maps. In this section, I like to have a world map so I can access it quickly during my game and also when I'm doing my prep. If you like to draw your own maps, for example on a mat, this is a great place to do a quick sketch so that when it's time to actually do it in your game, you can do it quicker. You might also want to have some links in this section as well for some map generators, maybe some website to help you build your own maps. Basically anything and everything to do with maps, this is a great place for you to have that information. Unit 5. Specific location information. In my opinion, this is the most important unit out of all of them. This is the page that I have open and ready to go every time I start running one of my games. This first topic is important history of the location. Here is where I write up any and all information I can about the location. I personally go into a lot of detail here because I want my players to feel like each location is special and unique. I like to write things down like a short history of the town. Who runs the town? What's the crime like here? And specific locations that I want the players to end up at. The more you put into the history of a location, the more that it comes alive, and the more adventures you can have in this location as well. So, for example, if you're in a town that is constantly bombarded by raiders, then they may have a very strong military presence. If there's a strong military presence, That means the bars and the town and the inns are all going to be filled with military people. So when your players start a fight, how's everybody else going to react? Are they all going to jump in because they're used to being comrades and fighting side by side? Or are they going to be just too tired of fighting and just want to give up and just turn the other cheek and look away? The plot points seem to write themselves when you go into a lot of detail in your locations. If you've taken some time to build some great story elements, like some dialogue and some descriptions, here is also a great place to go and put that information. If you want to know more about how to be a good storyteller, then why don't you go and watch our previous video right over here. I also have a dedicated page just to NPC names, with a short description after these names. I have a really difficult time remembering them, and this is why I have this page. If I don't write it down, then inevitably they're all going to be named Steve. Or Stevina. I don't know, it's a mystery. I love this page because I can easily access it, and it's always aligned to the location in which these people are already at. Finally, the most important session notes go in this location. For every session, you should have a plan. However, players are infamous for doing the unexpected, and for this reason, you should make your notes in the form of bulleted lists, with a few options just in case they decide to go this direction or that direction. Here is a real-life example of one of my session notes. If you'd like to see this session in action, click this video right over here. My players did find the secret behind the door, and it was beautiful. Anyway, what would I have done if my players decided to leave the sewers? First, I would have held on to these notes just in case they decided to go back later on. Then I would have heavily relied on important history of location to fill in the session. Because I spent time building the city before my players ever got here, there's a lot of interesting things for them to do, and a lot of adventures for them to have, even if they didn't go into the sewers. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, Campaign Notekeeping, Tome of the Game Master. Let me know in the comments which parts of my note-keeping strategies you plan to use in your next adventure. Are there areas that you would do differently? Things you would add or maybe subtract? Don't forget to like and subscribe while you're down there because it does help the channel quite a bit. Be sure to catch our next episode, Campaign Notekeeping, A Closer Look. In that episode, I plan to open up my real Game Master notes and share with you some of the things I have in there. Until then, my name is Tom Tobar, and I'll see you next time behind the screen.